What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back, bringing you another Pokemon card auctions of the week recap. In this week's recap, we will be discussing the good, the bad, and the downright crazy auctions that occurred. I got a lot here for you folks, so stay tuned. You're really going to enjoy this week's recap. A quick shout out to today's auction recap sponsor. It is the #1 website for high-end Pokemon card investments, lowpopping.com. Here on lowpopping.com, you will find a massive selection of PSA, CGC, and BGS graded cards, graded booster packs, sealed product spanning across all generations of the Pokemon TCG. And as I say week after week, one of the best things about lowpopping.com is if you don't have the cash on hand, you can easily trade for the items that you must have for your collection. And you also have the ability to make offers on just about anything you see, and they also offer worldwide shipping. I usually don't mention this, but you can also sell to them and get paid instantly. They buy graded and sealed Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Dragon Ball items. So after this recap, support the channel by going over to lowpopping.com and checking out what they have available. I'll put the link to the website in the description. Thank you so much for your support. All right, folks, as I said, I got a lot of stuff for you here. Let's jump into this week's recap, starting off with this lot of 10 PSA 10 evolutions from the Terastal Festival, which is the Japanese Prismatic Evolution set. So all 10 of these cards graded a PSA 10 and sold for a total of $1,950. Here we have, and this is pretty cool, a lot of 16 PSA 10 Pokemon Center stamp promo cards. So 16 different cards in all that sold for a total of $5,300. And you know that these Pokemon Center exclusive promos have been just through the roof in value recently. So $5,300 for 16 cards. What do you think? Up next, we have this little number. This is probably the craziest auction of the week. It is this Drowsy illustration rare from Scarlet and Violet base that had a sale this week as a PSA 10 for $800. Woo! Now this card wasn't considered valuable at all from pretty much the release up until about 2 weeks ago. Then all of a sudden it just exploded in value. People just can't seem to get enough of it. Now if you're anything like me, you are not understanding the obsession with this card right now, but there you go, folks. Almost a $1,000 illustration rare. I wanted to point out one graded card from Prismatic Evolutions. It's the special illustration rare Espeon EX. My favorite card from Prismatic Evolutions, sold as a PSA 10 for $1,250. I know everybody's gung-ho about the Umbreon nowadays, but I think this one right here is the prettiest card in the set. Speaking of Umbreon, here we have an Umbreon V from Evolving Skies. Sold as a PSA 10 for $561. And if you don't know, that is up quite a bit from what it was selling for about 2 months ago. It was selling for around $310, so almost double the price in just 2 months for this Umbreon V. However, the Umbreon V Max is not doing quite as well as it used to. And this card was selling for over $3,000 just a couple of weeks ago. It has since then come down to about $2,350. Here's another sale for $2,363. So still an insanely valuable and very desirable card, but it's about $700 to $800 less than what it was just a couple of weeks ago. We will, of course, keep our eye on this Moonbreon VMAX. Up next, we saw this Magikarp and Wailord GX alt art from Team Up that continues to do very well, selling this week as a PSA 10 for $1,625, along with this Lugia V from Silver Tempest, which has also been killing it lately, selling this week as a PSA 10 for $690. And this was a card that was selling just a month ago for $420, so doing pretty well this past week or two. Here is a Gengar and Mimikyu GX, also from Team Up, that sold for $2,412. And Gengar has just been killing it lately. I got a couple more Gengars on the list coming up here, so stay tuned. But Gengar is one of the most desirable Pokemon in this current market, if you ask me. Here we have another Latios GX from Team Up that sold for $4,600 this week. So still doing very well. This card was selling a little bit over $5,000. It's come down about, $400 to $500. Still extremely pricey. Here we have the Arceus, Dialga, and Palkia GX from Cosmic Eclipse. So we're getting a little bit of sun and moon here. In PSA 10, this card sold for $1,184. And then we saw this Umbreon GX secret rare card from Sun and Moon base. This Rainbow Rare sold as a PSA 10 for $455, while the Umbreon GX from Hidden Fates sold for $405 as a PSA 10. Up next, a couple of full art trainer cards for you. This one is also from Hidden Fates. It is the Cynthia full art in PSA 10 that sold for $260. Here we have a full art Rosa from Cosmic Eclipse that sold as a PSA 10 for an even $700. And then we saw this Lycia from Celestial Storm that sold for $620 this week. And then lastly, I got one card from the XY era. It is this Mega Rayquaza EX from Ancient Origins that sold for an even $2,000 this week. On to the vintage portion, we saw this Techno Blastoise from the Topps Chrome series, sold as a PSA 10 for $5,100. And then we saw a couple of base set first edition cards come by. Here is a PSA 9 first edition base set Charizard that sold for $25,806 this week, along with this PSA 10 first edition Venusaur from base set that sold for $12,600. You don't often see PSA 10 first edition base set cards come through on eBay anymore. They are usually sold on like Fanatics, Golden, Heritage, so pretty cool to see that on eBay. Here we have a PSA 10 Unlimited Portuguese Blastoise from base set. Pop 1 card that sold for $1,825, along with this Trainer Deck A Blastoise that got a PSA 10 and sold for $5,236. Here we have from Gym Challenge this first edition Sabrina's Gengar. I told you, Gengar has been hot this week. This non-holo card from WotC sold for $1,372. We also saw this Rocket Scyther from Gym Heroes sell as a PSA 10 for $1,825. We saw several sales from the Neo series. Here is a Neo Genesis first edition Feraligatr holo. Got a PSA 10 and sold for $1,079, along with this Typhlosion 18 first edition holo that sold for $2,050. And what's funny is the other versions of these cards from Neo Genesis, the Feraligatr number 5 and the Typhlosion 17, are way more expensive than these two right here, and they're just two cards that you never really see come through an auction. Here is an Unlimited Espeon holo from Neo Discovery. Beautiful card, sold for $990 as a PSA 10, along with this Unlimited Raikou from Neo Revelation that sold for $3,160. A couple of Shining cards from Neo Destiny. Here's a Shining Celebi, sold for $1,725. The Shining Kabutops sold for $1,825. The Shining Steelix sold for $2,075. And then this Shining Raichu sold for $3,716. Here is a Crystal Lugia from Aquapolis that sold for the staggering price of $14,200 this week. And we also saw this PSA 10 EV 500 point fan club promo card that sold for $8,100 this week. Here from Fire Red Leaf Green, we saw this Gengar EX sell as a PSA 10 for $6,100. And then here is a Black Star promo Rayquaza EX that sold for an even $5,000, along with this PSA 8 Gold Star Rayquaza from EX Deoxys that sold for $7,910. And then lastly, on eBay for our graded cards, we saw this Charizard holo from EX Power Keepers that sold for $1,505. On to some interesting pieces of sealed product. Here is a box of what looks to be 6 Blooming Waters premium collection boxes that you get from Costco, sold for a total of $690 for 6 boxes. So that's a little bit over $100 a box for these premium collection boxes. Seems like quite a bit to me. I'm not sure. What do you think? Up next, we saw a couple of sales of Surging Sparks booster boxes that have been doing very well. Here is a lot of 9 Surging Sparks boxes, sold for $2,237. And then here is a case of 6 Surging Sparks booster boxes that sold for $1,603. Here is a sealed Ancient Origins booster box that sold for an even $2,000. And then we saw several lots of loose booster packs from different sets. Here's a lot of 350 packs from Astral Radiance, so just about 10 booster boxes worth of packs that sold for $2,125. Here are 350 packs of Paldea Evolved that sold for $2,225. And then here we saw 350 packs of Paldean Fates that sold for $3,200. And let's finish off this recap with a couple of sales from Fanatics Collect. Here is a Black Label Zamazenta V from Crown Zenith that sold for $960 this week. Here is a CGC 10 Pristine Lugia V from Silver Tempest that sold for $1,110. So that is almost double what the PSA 10 was selling for earlier in the video. Up next is the best Feraligatr art in the entire TCG. This is the Feraligatr from Expedition, sold as a PSA 10 for $1,290. And then here we actually saw 12 of these, like 12 or 13 of these autographed Japanese 25th anniversary Charizards. They were all autographed by Arita, graded a PSA 10, I believe, and sold for $1,740. And like I said, there were about 12 or 13 of these cards, and they all sold for this amount. Up next, we have an Arceus Level X in PSA 10 that sold for $1,830. From Fossil Set, we saw a first edition Raichu sell as a PSA 10 for $1,980. Here is another Expedition card. This one's the Blastoise Holo that sold for $2,130. And then here we have another amazing Gengar sale. This one is from Neo Destiny. It's the first edition Dark Gengar, sold for $4,200 this week. Here is a PSA 10 first edition Kangaskhan from Jungle, a very tough card to grade. That sold for $4,440. And here is a first edition Blaine's Charizard from Gym Challenge that sold for $4,800 this week. Here is a PSA 10 first edition Dragonite from Fossil, sold for $5,160, along with this first edition Dark Magneton from Team Rocket, the lowest pop holo from Team Rocket, that sold for $5,280. Here is a Crystal Ho-Oh from Skyridge that sold for $5,280 as well. And then we saw this CGC 10 Pristine Sabrina's Gengar first edition holo from Gym Heroes that sold for 5,520 big ones. Gengar absolutely killing it this week. Couple of very expensive Japanese cards came through. Here is a PSA 9 Spring Battle Road Cynthia's Feelings card, sold for $6,900. Here is a CGC 10 Pristine Battle Boost Full Art Lily that sold for $8,100. Here is another Gengar, a CGC 10 Pristine First Edition Fossil Gengar that sold for $9,300. And then next we saw this 1996 Japanese Bandai Cardos Vending Prism Charizard. Whew, man, what a mouthful. This card sold as a PSA 10 for $9,600 this week. And then we saw the Legendary Birds test issue cards come by. These were just authenticated by PSA. The Moltres here sold for $9,600. The Zapdos sold for $10,200. And the Articuno sold for $11,400. Which brings us to the final auction in this week's recap. It is this 2009 Design Contest promo winner of Arceus in PSA 10, sold for 19,200 big wands. Folks, that was a lot of money being thrown around this week, but just you wait. Next week's recap is going to blow your mind. You don't want to miss it. Tons and tons of extremely expensive and interesting items coming through. That's all I got for you today. Don't forget to go check out lowpopping.com. I appreciate your support, and I will catch you all in my next one.